Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our chats with Emily, as we are calling our readings through the Johnson edition of the 1,775 poems of Emily Dickinson. We are now in poem number 9, Through Lane It Lay. Now our assumptions are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily, our playlist, and that you have already gone through our work at the in the intro lecture. And then we have now finished just recently with poem number 8, There Is a Word. Now the background here is interesting. First of all, we're going to look at the form of this poem. Notice the stanza construction. That is to say, you've got 14 lines, do you see it? Where you're going to have a setup, and then the last 3 lines will then play the game of an answer. And in that regards, it almost appears as if you have a call and response kind of poem happening. Okay. We want to point out as well that we're going to get an example of how Emily loves to shorten words. So we're going to get this glid versus glided, and that will be as well kind of fascinating. Of course, as we've already said, Emily Dickinson very influenced by the epic tradition and this notion of the Odyssey, this notion that Odysseus is on this long journey ultimately to get back to Ithaca, to home. Notice the last word of this poem. We're going to be playing this game again and again. Let's just enjoy the poem. Poem 9. Through lane it lay, through bramble, through clearing and through wood. Banditti often passed us up on the lonely road. The wolf came peering curious, the owl looked puzzled down, the serpent's satin figure glid stealthily along. The tempest touched our garments, the lightning's poniards gleamed. Fierce from the crag above us the hungry vulture screamed. The satyr's fingers beckoned, the valley murmured, "Come." These were the mates. This was the road. These children fluttered home. Now, again, the poem is a compelling poem in terms of its construction. Notice the rhythms, notice the use of the dashes, notice the 4 lines. Through lane it lay, again, notice her use of pronouns throughout all of her poems. And often we will have this vague antecedent to the pronoun. It what lay? We're obviously going to get, the answer, it's the last word, home, right? Through lane it lay, through bramble, through clearing, and through wood. Of course, notice all of the natural phenomenon that will be included in this poem and in so much of Emily Dickinson's poetry. We can't read something like this without thinking, obviously, of Frost's, stopping by woods and other poems that will couch so much of what happens as well in nature. Banditti often passes, the only use of that word banditti in all of her poetry. Banditti often passed us upon the lonely road. Notice it's the us that are the children at the concluding line. Passed us upon the lonely road. And again, notice it's a lonely kind of existence. The wolf, and now we're going to get animals. She loves to do this in her poetry. The wolf came, and then interesting verbs. Peering curious. The owl looked puzzled down. So notice we've got peering and puzzled, right? The serpents, look at poem 986, the narrow fellow in the grass, to see how she loves to play around with snakes. The serpent's satin figure glid, it should of course be glided, right? Glid stealthily along. And Emily will play this game where she changes words. I think she was inspired by Shakespeare to do this kind of thing. The tempests touched our garments. In other words, the weather nasty. The lightning's poniards gleamed. We think of poniards, of course, and immediately we start thinking about the Civil War and the bayonets on the ends of rifles in the Civil War, and the way in which Whitman played similar games of the gleaming of those swords and the knives. Fierce from the crag above us. Her use of the word fierce, run it to ground, it's fascinating. The hungry vulture screams. So notice, we've got wolves, we've got owls, we've got serpents, we've got vultures. These beasts, these animals that are, of course, recognized as being, to some degree, maybe dangerous, not so hospitable. And then, in the last 2 lines of the last stanza, to just finish this, to get to our 14 lines, the satyr's fingers beckon, and we cannot help but think of something like Pilgrim's Progress here in a poem like this, right? In other words, temptation, the voice of temptation. The valley murmured, come. It's fascinating, as we said in our talks with Walt, that the very first word of the deathbed edition of Leaves of Grass is the word come, that invitation word. But notice here, it's the valley, which will, for Emily's readers, certainly take them to the 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. So notice it's the valley murmured, come, and then the dash. And then notice italicized, these were the mates. This was the road. And of course, this idea of the road immediately, of course, makes us think about Song of the Open Road, Whitman's classic, right? That is to say, everything is drawn from her understanding of Homer, the road that has to happen. These children fluttered home. This idea of fluttering is obviously our flight theme. The idea of fluttering, it's a rare transitive verb that she'll use here. I'm going to take us really quickly because we're going to see it later. I just like to set you guys up to this, to to poem 145. This heart that broke so long, these feet that never flagged, this faith that watched for star in vain, give gentle to the dead. Hound cannot overtake the hare that fluttered panting here, nor any schoolboy rob the nest. Tenderness builds there. This idea of fluttering, I think, is a compelling where these children fluttered home. Notice this is the only of the previous stanzas. This is the only one that has 5 lines, right? All the rest had their 4 lines for the balance. And notice the use of the word home. And this is one of the most important words in all of Emily Dickinson. This idea of home security, as we said in our biography information, that for Emily, place matters. And so here, notice the journey home. Now, of course, the home here is referenced as the safety, the security that the children are longing for. Notice it is plural, children and not child, right? What are we going to do with a poem like this at 2A? Well, I think one of the obvious messages is that life is a journey, and it's a journey where you got to go through some really bad stuff. Obviously, the goal is to get home, to get to Ithaca. And of course, that's the answer to, in our Big Five, that's the answer to the theodicic question, why must there be all this struggle and this pain? Oh no, that's what makes the journey home to Ithaca what it is. It's the owl, it's the vulture, it's the other serpents, it's the other stuff of the poem. At 2B, I love this form here, and I love the rhythm of the poem. Hey guys, I'm hopeful that you guys are enjoying reading these poems out loud, deciding where you want to place the inflection, for example. The rhythms, the rhyme, all of it is brilliantly constructed. And I want you to hear Emily Dickinson's poetry out loud, not just from my reading, but from a large number of other readings. I mean, you can go online at YouTube, for example, and find there's any number of people who are reading these poems, and I would recommend that you play with the ways in which you're reading. Several of you have started Emily groups that I'm hearing about. That's pretty awesome. And one of the things you probably do is just sit around and read these poems out loud. It's really fun to kind of hear them read aloud. At 3A, how are we going to relate this to other texts? Well, I've mentioned a number. Pilgrim's Progress comes to mind, others. Walt Whitman's Song of the Open Road, afoot lighthearted, I take to the open road, healthy, free, the world before me. The long brown path before me leading wherever I choose. And we've given full lectures, of course, on that at learnstrong.net with talks with Walt. Homer's Odyssey comes to mind. Virgil's Aeneid comes to mind. Any of those, Dante's Inferno comes to mind. Think about all the classic epics and the way in which the journey home, or the journey to some safe and secure spot, Paradiso and the Divine Commedia, is what drives all of that action. Finally, at 3B, how are we going to own a poem like this? Well, how about this one? What's the hardest journey you ever had to take, and then you finally made it home, past the vulture, past the serpent, past the crag, and you made it home, and you felt secure, at least for a while. What was that journey for you? And is it possible that in your own journey, and maybe our reading of Emily's poems together is a challenge for you, maybe you, I hope, are finding some sense of home? Thank you.